After spending more time with Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced, I realized something really interesting. Almost every major gameplay complaint people have about this remake is connected. Things like hand-to-hand combat, hidden blade combat, weapon pickups, and even better parkour controls. At first, these seem like completely separate problems, but are actually caused by one major design decision Ubisoft made. Too many actions in Resynced are locked behind specific buttons and contextual situations. And because of that, the game slowly takes away something the original Black Flag was built around: player freedom. The freedom to improvise, the freedom to change your approach on the fly, and the freedom to let the game adapt to you instead of forcing you to adapt to it. If Ubisoft fixes that problem, everything I just mentioned will start working the way it always should have, and the gameplay could finally become perfect. Let me show you what I mean. Unarmed combat is the first example of how button restrictions are hurting player freedom. In the original Black Flag, you could simply equip Edward's fists and start fighting enemies. You could literally walk up to enemies and start fisting them until there's no one left. The weirdest part is that Resynced already has the entire system included. The animations exist, the finishers exist, the enemies know how to fight, and the game literally lets you do it during bar fights. So why can't we use it whenever we want? And the answer goes back to the same problem I mentioned earlier. Too many actions are locked behind specific buttons. Because every weapon, tool, and ability already have its own dedicated input, adding another combat option becomes much harder than it needs to be. And the funny thing is, Ubisoft already had the perfect solution sitting in the original game. In Black Flag 2013, you could instantly switch between your weapons and tools without opening a menu or stopping the flow of the gameplay thanks to the cross menu. The Ezio Trilogy's weapon wheel achieved the same thing as well. Both systems gave players more control without sacrificing accessibility or the gameplay flow. Bring that back and suddenly one missing feature starts fixing multiple problems at once. Because the next feature people have been asking for has the exact same problem: hidden blade combat. In Black Flag 2013, the hidden blades were actual weapons you could equip whenever you wanted. You could pull them out outside or mid-combat, fight with them, perform unique finishers, and put them away when the fight was over. And once again, the animations already exist in Resynced, at least for the finishers. The game clearly knows how Edward should move when using the hidden blades, but it just doesn't give players control over when they can use them. So the solution is exactly the same: let players equip them through the cross menu. Not only would this make Resynced closer to the original, but it would also make combat feel much more varied. Sword combat, hidden blade combat, unarmed combat, weapon pickups, every encounter used to feel different in the original. Not necessarily harder, just more varied. And this is where Ubisoft needs to be careful, because we've already seen an approach that technically works but goes against the design philosophy that made the older Assassin's Creed games so much fun. In Assassin's Creed Shadows, you can technically access unarmed combat by unequipping your weapons from the inventory menu, but that isn't a real solution. Because it takes you out of the world, interrupts the flow of gameplay, and worse, it only works when the game decides it's okay for you to do it. You can change your equipment while you're moving around just fine, but the moment you're attacking, getting hit, jumping, climbing, or performing another action, the game temporarily takes that choice away from you until the action ends. So instead of letting me react in the moment, I have to wait until the game decides I'm allowed to change my equipment again. That's exactly what the original Black Flag avoided with its cross-menu system, and what Resynced should avoid too. And you can already see traces of that same philosophy in Resynced too, unfortunately. It's nowhere near as restrictive as the RPG games, of course, but the idea is still there. Whether it's swapping equipment through the inventory or contextual actions like putting Edward's hood up, the game still decides when you're allowed to do certain things instead of letting the player decide. For example, let's say you're in the middle of a fight and you want to put Edward's hood up. You hold the left on the D-pad to sheath your sword, and then press left on the D-pad to put your hood up, and then nothing happens. Not because the option doesn't exist, of course, but because the game has decided this isn't the right moment for you to do it. At the same time, actions like whistling and throwing coins are still mapped to their own buttons during combat, even though they're practically useless in that situation. If the game is already changing what certain buttons do depending on the context, why not use these inputs for something that's actually relevant, like picking up enemy weapons? The same thing applies to the inventory menu. You can change your weapons just fine until you're in the middle of an action. Now, because this isn't an RPG, the inventory isn't nearly as central to the experience as it is in Shadows, for example. But that's not really the point. The point is, The game is still deciding when you're allowed to make certain choices instead of simply letting you make them. By the way, I'm not saying contextual actions shouldn't exist. They absolutely should. But if the game is going to decide which actions are available based on the situation, those decisions need to make sense. Otherwise, all they're doing is taking control away from the player. A proper cross menu avoids that problem almost entirely, because instead of the game deciding what's available, the player decides what they want to do. And that's exactly why this whole thing feels so confusing, because Ubisoft doesn't need to reinvent these mechanics. Some of these systems are already in the game. Others are missing because the current control scheme doesn't have room to support them. Take weapon pickups for example. One of my favorite things about the original Black Flag was that you could disarm an enemy, pick up their sword, and kill them with their own weapon, or grab a nearby musket and immediately start shooting with it. It was simple, chaotic, and really immersive. Those little interactions rewarded improvisation instead of limiting it, and freeing up some of those locked inputs could open the door to bringing moments like this back too. And while we're talking about giving Edward more freedom, this should also extend outside of combat. I would love to see the return of mechanics from the older Assassin's Creed games, like freely tackling or grabbing anyone whenever I want, or pickpocketing people again. I used to do the dumbest things in the OG Black Flag, like I would throw coins for people, then steal the money right back just because I could. It's those little interactions that made spending time in the world feel more meaningful. Now technically, some of these mechanics still exist in Resynced. Like you can still pickpocket certain NPCs during specific missions, and tackling hasn't disappeared entirely either. But that's exactly the problem. They're no longer player-driven interactions you can do whenever you want. They're contextual actions the game decides to let you perform, and that's a very different design philosophy. See how all of these missing interactions keep leading back to the same design philosophy? Some of them come from the lack of a proper cross menu, but others come from mechanics the older Assassin's Creed games were built around, like the high and low profile system, which gave players much more control over how the same buttons behave depending on the state they chose, not the one the game chose for them. They all point toward the same thing, giving control back to the player. But that's not the only place where this focus on player freedom matters. The same problem appears in stealth too, and this one is even more frustrating. I mentioned it in the main review, where you can watch it from the corner of your screen, but I'll bring this specific stealth error back once more. You see, if you're spotted in one part of the map and escape to another, the new location's nearby guards are still completely unaware of your wanted status, which is a very good thing. It is how you expect them to behave. And yet, in this exact state, the assassination prompt just disappears on these unaware guards, until you go anonymous again. So even though they have no idea you're wanted, the game still locks you out of assassinating them for no clear reason. That inconsistency actively works against player freedom and creates a massive headache. The solution is simple too. Let the assassination attempt happen, and if anything, if I tried assassinating an alerted guy, just let them interrupt or cancel it. That system already existed in Assassin's Creed 1, a game from nearly 2 decades ago, so it's hard to understand why it's been lost here. And player freedom isn't just about what the game lets you do, it's also about the information it gives you. So one of the features that could massively improve that is the return of an actual minimap. Not to replace the compass, of course, not at all, but as an optional mode, exactly like Red Dead Redemption 2, where you simply pick the one you prefer. So before Timmy in the back of the bus starts screaming, "Don't touch my compass!" Relax, dude, I'm not taking it away from you. I just want another option because I genuinely think a minimap is the better system. That's the whole point, more freedom and more choices. With a minimap, I can understand my surroundings at a glance. I know where the streets lead, where nearby guards are patrolling, where my hiding spots are, where the nearest shop or mission is, and I can plan my route without opening the map every 30 seconds. Although don't get me wrong, I did open the map in the original game too, but not as much as I need to rely on it in here. And let me tell you something, it reduces the gameplay flow significantly in Resynced. Actually, Resynked's compass looks cleaner than a minimap, and its job is to make you look at the world more than looking at the UI elements, but sometimes it feels like I'm fighting the interface more than using it. So the real problem is that the compass actively hides information. Why? because icons constantly disappear if you slightly move away from them, or sometimes nearby shops won't even pop up on your compass unless you manually select them from your map. I understand not wanting to clutter the screen, but this is exactly why an optional minimap works. Also, when sailing the Jackdaw, instead of relying on those little wind effects that randomly appear whenever they feel like it, the minimap could simply show the wind direction at all times, just like the original game did. Well, yes, the black flag on top of the Jackdaw technically tells you which way the wind is blowing, and it's immersive as hell. I still think having the wind direction displayed on the minimap is far more convenient. Again, none of this is about forcing one playstyle, it's about giving players more information if they want it. And this philosophy doesn't stop at combat or the interface either, it affects movement too. I'm not going too deep into parkour because that's getting its own dedicated video, but there's one thing that I have to mention. Movement should be subconscious, so I shouldn't have to worry about sprinting. Have you ever climbed over something in Mirage, Shadows or Resynced and immediately clicked L3 again because you weren't sure if the character was still sprinting? Yeah, I figured. That's why L3 sprinting sucks. In a game that's all about flowing through cities, I shouldn't be wondering whether my character is sprinting after every animation. And once again, this comes back to the controls. Freeing up those combat inputs gives Ubisoft room to move sprint back onto R2, where movement naturally feels more responsive. And yes, before someone says, just remap it, I know, you can remap it to R2, and that's better than nothing. But it also creates conflicts because the game wasn't designed around it. The reason this matters goes way beyond sprinting, by the way. It ties directly into high and low profile system and why classic Assassin's Creed movement still feels different today. I'll save that discussion for another day because it deserves an entire video on its own. But moving on, movement and stealth also have one thing in common: crowds. They're one of Assassin's Creed's core stealth mechanics, but as I've stated in the review, I feel the density has been downgraded compared to the original, both in terms of density and their mechanical usefulness. For instance, when you threw coins in the original Black Flag, people rushed toward them from every direction, allowing you to distract NPCs and creating dynamic hiding spots. But in Resynced, you can't create the same chaos anymore. Part of the reason is simply the crowd density, and no, I'm not asking for unity, I just want the original Black Flag's density back. The other part is that the blending mechanic is clunky as hell. The original communicated social stuff instantly with saturation change, markers, and the overall Animus UI elements. And while Resynced's system technically works, it communicates less clearly. Most of the time, blending between different crowd groups simply fails. And you can't blend into a couple of people standing. It always has to be more than 3 people. And while Resynced has its own visual cues for social stealth, like the white outline, the eye icon beneath the compass, and a subtle vignette effect, I still think the overall feedback is weaker than the OG's. Good stealth isn't just about AI. The more clearly a game communicates information, the more confidently players can improvise. So that's just as important. Now, everything I've talked about so far changes how Black Flag Resynced plays, but this next feature I'm going to talk about changes how long you'll keep playing it. One of the biggest strengths of Assassin's Creed has always been experimenting, trying different approaches, seeing what happens when you tackle the same mission in completely different ways, and so on. That's exactly where mission replay comes in. And no, before somebody says it, I'm not talking about New Game Plus. They're two completely different features. I don't want to replay the entire game just because I want to experience one mission differently. Let me replay any mission whenever I want. The original Black Flag had a mission replay system, and even Mirage eventually got it, so I really hope Resynced gets it too. If Ubisoft wants to add optional objectives and rewards on top of that, even better. If not, that's completely fine. Not just the main story either. Let me replay side content as well. Please, Ubisoft, bring this feature back and keep it in Assassin's Creed forever. Every Assassin's Creed should launch with mission replay. Ubisoft already proved with Resynced that they're willing to rethink Assassin's Creed. I just hope they keep going, because if even half of these changes make it into future updates, I genuinely think this could become not only the definitive version of Black Flag, but also the blueprint for every Assassin's Creed remake and sequel that follows. So, what else would you add to make this game better? Let me know in the comments.